Entitled Aunt wants us to sever our property for her. First post on this sub, let me know if there are any grammar/spelling mistakes. Cast. My mom M. Entitled Aunt, EA. Asshole cousin C1 and C2, they'll come in later. Me, duh. So, there's a little bit of backstory before we get into this. EA has 2 children, C1 who is around 10, and C2 who is 6. These kids are the biggest brats ever. EA just lets them do whatever they want. They're also homeschooled, and their curriculum consists of building sheds and gardening. They aren't very literate. Because they've been homeschooled practically all their life, they haven't had much opportunity to be around other kids, as EA is extremely overprotective. She also comes sobbing to us after almost every time she gets fired from her job to ask us for increasingly large sums of money, which she spends on expensive things. They seem to like my brother best, so whenever they come over, or we go over to their house, they always seem to want to play with him. C1 and C2 also have no concept of privacy, and like to barge into my siblings' rooms just because, which has led to some uncomfortable encounters. Don't really feel like I should delve into this on this post. They also have a dog, which they keep in their extremely small backyard, and it's not trained. The story. EA calls up my mother a couple of weeks ago. They call back and forth about once a week. EA is thinking of moving, because she has realized her house is too small for 2 children, her husband, and an overactive dog that they keep locked up in the kitchen when they have guests. At the time, we were also thinking of moving, so EA had the great idea of suggesting that we sever our property, so that she can live with us. We have about 4 acres of property, not including a strip of forest that we own. My mother, being a bit of a pushover, thinks that it's a good idea. But our grandparents, who I'd prefer lived with us, also wanted to at the time. And while our property is large, it's not large enough for everyone. My mother brings up that fact, and then EA changes her idea from severing the property, so building an extension on our house so that we can live in the same house. And not only does she want to build an extension on our house, she wants us to pay for it. Plumbing, utilities, electrical, everything. And the house that they want isn't exactly small. I think my dad managed to talk some sense into my mother about how crazy the idea was, and my mother seemed to agree. So when EA comes over the next week, my mother and EA have the following conversation. EA, so have you thought about what we talked about last week? Yes, and I don't think it's a good idea for us to sever our property and pay for your house. EA, but why not? Your kids love C1 and C2, and they'd love to live with them. We don't have the money to build 2 more extra houses on our property, EA, especially with how large you want yours to be. At that point, C1 and C2 chimed in with how much they loved us and wanted to live with us. Which EA clearly put them up to. Thankfully my mother managed to stand her ground on our decision. EA, you cannot live with us. If you want a bigger house, just move. EA, but we can't. My husband I don't work, and my kids are getting taught by me. This also isn't the first time that EA and my uncle haven't had jobs. They refuse to send their kids to school, which makes working difficult, and they end up getting fired and trying to get money from my family. And my mother normally gives it out. I think at that point she had gotten fed up with EA, and had asked them politely to leave, which resulted in EA calling my mom a bitch, and a bunch of other names, and then leaving with her sobbing and screaming kids in tow. We haven't seen them since, and my mother avoids her at all family gatherings. I know that this isn't your typical crazy story. If this doesn't fit the sub, I'll remove it. Edit. To further expand on what I mean by not very literate, I mean that they can read, just not at the level that they should be reading at that age. I think CPS would have something to say about those kids not being properly educated. This is why I hate the entire concept of homeschool in less regulated states. In some states, US, it's great, they provide materials, curriculum, and even set up extracurricular opportunities so kids can socialize. Remote classrooms, and online public schools work really well, too. There are actual educators involved, and the curriculum is vetted. It's especially great if you're in a rural area, or one where the school system is below average. No overcrowded rooms, no dangerous halls to walk, etc. In other states, all the parents have to do is claim they're teaching their kids. They can make conscientious objections to materials/subjects. They've still got access to some study groups, if they're in an area that has a homeschool group, and they're supposed to hit specific benchmarks, but it can be a very lenient system. Think of the version of schooling you see in reality shows, where super large families have the older children teach the younger ones as they get older, and call this school. Then the ones who've completed their education find out that their so-called diploma is useless. It's ridiculous how lax some states make their requirements for homeschooling, and the poor kids have no say, and often no idea, in the quality of their education. So that's how the world keeps getting dumber. And here I was thinking Idiocracy was just a crazy movie. I was homeschooled for 2 years by my grandmother, but she was a retired teacher of 30 years. Your mother needs to hold tight to that shiny spine and not let your EA guilt her into giving in. Make no mistake, they can't seem to hold jobs for their own sake. Imagine the potential issue there will be, when they have you right there to be their go-to guys, for everything. Expenses, childcare, they already have no intention of contributing anything to building the house for them. Your parents need to make sure those ideas are shut down. Do not let her on your property. They need to learn to get and keep steady jobs that are enough to support them on their own. You mom needs to stop bailing her out. I also feel for those children. I am shocked CPS has not gotten involved. Even homeschooled children have to be registered with the state and their education is still monitored. If they are in fact illiterate, but still making the grades, your EA is falsifying their grade scores. She is setting those kids up for so much difficulty in their future.